In this video, I'm going to walk you through this email template that you might use to request an informational interview during a weekend trip that you have planned to New York, London, or any other major financial center. And just to review a few of the basic concepts on these informational interviews during weekend trips, one of the most important points is you really need to schedule as many as you possibly can, otherwise your trip is just not worth it. To give some numbers, I would say that unless you can meet with at least five or so people on each day of your trip, it's probably not going to be worthwhile given the huge expense and the time commitment and everything else. So try to meet at least five people on each day if at all possible. And in terms of actually setting it up and planning your trip and everything, as I mentioned before, you want to email them at least a couple weeks in advance. I give 2 to 3 weeks right here, and that's fine. You could go a bit longer than that. I wouldn't go too far in advance, so I would not email them, say, 2 months in advance. I would keep it to some time frame in the weeks instead. Otherwise, they're just going to forget about it. And then, of course, you always want to follow up a few days before. So probably the week of your trip, follow up and just confirm again that they'll be meeting with you. And of course, when you're actually out there and meeting with everyone, you want to have a mobile device, an iPhone or BlackBerry or something that lets you read email and get phone calls on the go so that you don't have any nasty surprises at the last minute. Of course, it helps if you have an existing relationship with the person, and that's the assumption that we're going to be making with this template, that you've spoken with them on the phone before or at least traded emails, and so they're going to be more likely to respond and more likely to actually have a meeting with you. Of course, you don't need to stick to this. If you want, you could reach out to new people and request to meet them during your trip to a major financial center, but usually you'll get a better response rate if you've at least spoken with someone, they know who you are, rather than having completely cold contact. And then, of course, you want to suggest specific days and times. Always make sure when you're networking that you're in proposal mode. You're suggesting something and offering up an alternative if it doesn't work, as opposed to just being open-ended and kind of being wishy-washy with your requests and saying, oh, well, let's meet sometime this week. That is not going to get a good response from people. And of course, before you even go about emailing people, what you want to do is say you have a list of 50 people in New York, for example, that you want to meet with. You should figure out where they're working, which is not hard because you have that information if you've contacted them or emailed them already. And what you want to do is actually get out a map of Manhattan, for example, and figure out who is where. So batch together people who are in Midtown, batch together people who are in downtown, and obviously if you're not in New York, if you're in a different area, then do the same thing. Get a map out of whatever city you're going to and where the different banks are. You can get the information from people's email addresses in a lot of cases. Just use Google Maps, figure out where they are, and when you email people with your requests, batch together the requests based on who is located in which area. So if you send out 10 or 15 or 20 email requests for one day, make sure that the afternoon proposals that you have are all in relatively the same area. Make sure that the morning proposals are all also in the same area. That way you're not running around constantly. And you can't always stick to that. It's not always possible to get it perfect, but try to do it as much as you can because otherwise you're just going to go crazy running around constantly to different parts of the city. And as I mentioned before, probably about half of your initial email requests will actually turn into meetings. Now, this is actually a bit of a pessimistic estimate. It may actually be better than this, but from my own experience and from interviewing people who have done this, it seems like in most cases you really have to request a lot more meetings than you actually get on a given day. So if you want to meet with 10 to 20 people, you probably have to send about 30 to 40 email requests. And oftentimes what happens is you'll get confirmations from people, but then they'll drop out at the last minute because they get pulled away to do something else, or they get busy, or they have to travel suddenly. So keep that in mind as well. Now, to get into the actual email template here, I would suggest for the subject saying something like upcoming trip to city name and then giving the approximate dates. So we could say, for example, New York, and then we could say September 20th to, could actually just call this 920 to 923 or something like that. And again, this assumes that you already know the person. If you don't already know the person, then your subject will have to be a bit different from this. So if you don't already know them, then I would probably say give your university name instead and say trip to New York on and then again, give the dates right here. And if you've gotten a referral through someone else, then obviously you'd write referral from referral name, and then again, get into the trip and then the dates as well. So those are a couple different options for your subject for the email. It doesn't matter all that much, just make sure that it gets their attention and gives some kind of specific information so that they're better able to respond to it. Now in the actual email, again, if you've already spoken with the person, just use their first name. If you haven't and it's more formal, then you can say Dear Mr. or Ms. So-and-so, but usually you're fine going with the first name. And I would suggest starting by saying, I hope all is well, with some kind of story they told you about. So maybe they talked about a recent deal they're working on, or vacation, or a personal event, or ski trip, something like that. And just say, thanks again for taking the time out to speak with me. That way you remind them immediately who you are, that you've actually spoken before, that you're someone, as opposed to some guy or some girl who's just randomly contacting the person. And then the second paragraph, you want to bring up your upcoming weekend trip. Just get straight to the point here. Don't beat around the bush. People are not going to reply if your email is excessively long. Make sure that it's 2 or 3 paragraphs at the most, as it is here. And again, just say where you're going to be. So the city name, and say 2 or 3 weeks from now, during the week of. And if we follow the example above, we could say something like during the week of September 18th, for example. So that's how you'd phrase that type of request. And then again, you're sort of giving them a comfortable decline option here. Once again, I know you're busy, but it would be great to meet up in person so I could learn more about, and then again, mention some kind of personal background or business story or some kind of point like that that they mentioned before. So if you're speaking with a consultant who transitioned into finance, you could put that here so I could learn more about how you made the move from McKinsey to Lazard or something like that. And I would say for this one, actually, you probably want to mention something that is more business or background related here, as opposed to saying, so I could learn more about your trip through South America. Something like that is probably better for the first paragraph of your email where you're reminding them who you are and that you've spoken before. I would probably put something a little more business or background related here. And then in the final paragraph or the final sentence here, just say that you're going to be in their area, which is presumably where they work. You might actually consider replacing this and say, I'll be in, you could say, I'll be around, say, JP Morgan, for example, on Friday. I'm just making up these dates, September 22nd, and Saturday, September 23rd, in the afternoon between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. each day. Let me know what works best for you. And we're giving them multiple options here because it's plausible that one of these may not work or they may be traveling or something like that. So you always going to want to give multiple options when you're emailing them to request a meeting like this. I would suggest batching similar areas to be in either the morning or afternoon on each day of your trip. That way it makes it easier to email people because you can kind of put together a template quickly and send it out to certain people on your contact list. And then again, you close by just giving your name and contact information again. So just to summarize this email and what it's doing right, again, you have a brief introduction that gets to the point, tells the person who you are and that you've spoken before, and then it gives multiple reasons why you want to meet. So you want to learn more about something, recruiting season is starting up again, and you're also going to be in their area. So that's 3 solid reasons right there. And then going back to the point that I just made, you propose specific days, dates, and times, and you give multiple options in case one does not work. You could even add something there that says, in case one of these does not work, let me know if something else during that week would work better for you in these time slots, for example. I haven't added that here because I found that it makes the email a little too long, and in a lot of cases, you don't really need to do it, and they may actually propose something else that works for them during that week. But you could do that if you wanted to. And if you've already spoken with this person, you have some kind of relationship, you'll probably get some type of response here. I would try to schedule a 30-minute meeting, and when you're going back and forth over email, you could actually put that in here as well. You could say, I'll be in your area on these dates. It'd be great to speak with you for 20 or 30 minutes to catch up and see what's going on. So you could make a specific time proposal here as well. But If not, I would say try to shoot for about 20 to 30 minutes and then give yourself a 15 to 30-minute buffer around the meeting, which will allow for transportation. So give yourself at least 15 minutes or so to get to and from this place. Because if you don't know where you're going, you haven't been there before, then logistically it may be difficult and it's actually quite common to get lost, even if you're in a city like New York, where it's usually not too hard to get around if you're in the same area and things are laid out in blocks, usually pretty logically, but you just never know. And especially if you have a poor sense of direction, it's important to do this. Now, if you don't get a response, I would just follow up the week after via email, which is why you want to do this a couple weeks in advance. If you still get nothing, just move to the phone after that. If you still get nothing, then I would probably just forget about the person and move on to other contacts. You don't have time to waste, especially if you have a solid list of dozens of people to contact. If one person's not responding, just forget about it and move on to some of the others on your list. Again, I would shoot for one informational interview per hour on a given day. And that ensures, if you think about the timing here, that ensures that you'll probably be requesting meetings with anywhere between 8 to 10 people or so, depending on your time frame, when you want to start and everything. And that ensures that you'll at least meet a few people on each day, even if you have some cancellations or last minute changes of plans. The other benefit of doing that is if a meeting goes really well and if a person invites you back or you invite yourself back to wherever they work, that also gives you time in case someone else afterward cancels. It gives you more time to walk around and meet other people there as well. And again, to actually get this many interviews set up, you're going to probably need to send quite a few more requests than interviews. So be prepared for the logistics. To be honest, I actually hate doing this stuff, and I find it really annoying to schedule this many meetings with people, which is one reason why I suggest that 1 or 2 weekend trips is probably enough in most cases. I think three or more is usually getting a bit excessive unless you have a really good reason to do it. Because again, managing the logistics and everything is a giant pain. And as you go through this, you'll wish that you had a secretary or someone else, some kind of assistant to manage this whole process for you. But keep in mind that it's usually only something that you need to do once or twice when you go through this networking process. So it's not really that big a deal. It's just important to get it right, get as many meetings as you can, and get the most out of them as you possibly can to make the trip worth your while.